All right, looks like we're ready to go. Everybody, welcome. I think we have everybody from council here. There's Steve Davis down there. All right. Welcome. Today is October 15th. It is our second meeting of the month, regularly scheduled meeting, and we're going to launch right into our work session. But prior to that, Carl wanted to say something real quick and make an introduction because he has another event where he'll be missing part of our work session today. Can you ever hear me?
Yeah, sorry about that, Jonathan. You just didn't. Nobody let me talk. Oh. I just want to point out that Richard Peterson Kremer is on from my office. He's going to be covering the airport work session. He actually has been doing a lot of the work out at the airport on various issues. He's also the guy that did all the work on South Midland as well that I mentioned at the last meeting. So I just wanted to introduce him. He's on, so you guys aren't wondering why there's this random person on as a panelist right now. So with that, I'll be quiet.
All right. Thanks, Carl. We have our first work session today is a water rate study. So who is presenting this?
Good evening or afternoon, Council. As you know, the City of Glenwood Springs has been working on a water sewer rate study for basically the entire year. It's gotten a little slow just because of COVID and access to things. Brian Mance at GovRates is our consultant for this. He has a short slideshow he'd like to go through. We'll do some question and answer at the end, if that's all right with you. Yes. All right, Brian, you want to take it over?
Sure. Can everyone hear me?
We can.
Yes.
Okay. Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Brian Mance, and I am with GovRates, and I'm here to talk about the water and wastewater rate review for 2021 and 2022. So let me just... So the current analysis is focusing what is needed for 2021 and 2022. The reason is that the city is in the process of implementing a new billing system that won't be fully operational until the middle of 2021 at the earliest. And we currently have incomplete meter size and unit data. So we're recommend implementing an interim rate structure changes until a new billing system is set up for a finalized rate design. So we've presented the findings in this presentation to the city's financial advisory board during meetings held on October 26th and September 23rd. And the city's financial advisory board recommendations are reflected in this presentation. So when we talk about the cities...
Brian, sorry to interrupt real quick. There's some rustling going on. Is anybody else hearing that in feedback, or is it just my earphones? I don't know. Okay. I don't know if anybody else hears that rustling. Sorry, go ahead.
Okay. Can everyone still hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so when we talk about the water and wastewater utility, we're talking about an entity that provides an essential service on a continuous basis, where public health and safety is the primary objective. It's also a very highly regulated utility, and it's regulated by the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment, as well as the Environmental Protection Agency, and permits issued by regulatory bodies require compliance with regulations. The utility is also an enterprise fund where operations are primarily funded through user rates and fees. And it's important to note that user rates were last adjusted in 2015, or almost 6 years ago. The utility is also a large business of the city, and there are about $80 million installed cost of utility assets under city management. With respect to determining the level of rates, we take a look at what we call revenue requirements. We look at operation and maintenance expenses, capital improvement program funding, the capital improvement program needs funded through rates, debt service and coverage requirements, which basically mean that you have to set rates at a certain so that your net revenues will be a certain amount above annual debt service, administrative transfers and reserve allowances. All of these elements make up what we call annual revenue requirements to be funded through rates. So, major cost factors affecting the water and wastewater utility system. Well, right now, and again, the rates haven't been adjusted since 2015. Revenues under the existing rates, after we pay our operating expenses and existing debt service, provide minimal funding for capital needs. Certainly, we expect operating expenses to continue increasing. And when we talk about inflation and the consumer price index, we have to recognize those are really permanent increases in costs that must ultimately be passed through to ratepayers. But also due to the regulatory environment, and the capital intensive nature of utility operations, and the reliance on commodities such as electricity, chemicals, and fuel, utilities costs typically increase at a higher rate than general inflation. And despite COVID-19, the Congressional Budget Office, which is a nonpartisan organization, is still showing CPI to increase by 1.6 to 2.2% per year for the foreseeable future. The utility has recognized an immediate need for 4 additional personnel for risk reliability to help prevent service interruptions and to address the system's renewal and replacement capital needs. Addressing the capital needs has put a strain on the day-to-day operations, and the COVID-19 pandemic has shown the need to address potential serious problems if one or more current treatment plant operators got sick. And so we've recognized the need for 4 additional personnel, as I mentioned. With these personnel, the utility would be much better positioned to deal with natural employee loss and replacement. And also the new positions would help reduce the costs of capital projects, since contractors would charge substantially more. And so in the forecast period, we've recognized the mid-year hiring of 2 positions in 2021 and the hiring of the remaining 2 positions in 2022. The system has substantial capital needs just because of its age. With respect to utility infrastructure, it's often out of sight, out of mind, but there are substantial capital needs that are primarily replacements and rehabilitations of utility assets that are just reaching the end of their service lives, and they have to be replaced so that the city can continue providing reliable and water and wastewater service. So we've recognized the need for about $18.2 million through 2022, and we're proposing to debt finance about $8.5 million of it. We anticipate that the utility may be able to secure a matching 50% grant for the sediment basins and pump line construction and design, and the rest would be paid on a pay-as-you-go basis. Issues with the current water rates, and here at the bottom of the screen we show these are basically the water rates for all of the residential and non-residential customers. And one thing that we immediately notice is that all customers pay the same monthly base charge. And what's more typical in the industry is that if a customer has greater demand on the system, that customer should pay a higher amount of the system's fixed cost, since most of the utilities costs are fixed. And so the city may want to consider implementing base charges by meter size once the new billing system becomes operational. That's more of a typical rate structure in the utility industry. But as I mentioned, we do have incomplete meter size data that the staff is remedying that situation. Also, residential and non-residential customers have the same price blocks. Basically, these are the same price blocks for all customers. And because non-residential usage tends to be higher than residential usage, the most non-residential usage is billed at the most expensive volumetric rate. So if we consider these volumetric price blocks to be kind of, with the first block being indoor or essential usage, the second block being discretionary usage, and the third block being for more or less excessive usage, then most non-residential usage is being billed at the most expensive volumetric rate, which is really trying to target excessive usage. Another issue with the current water base rates is that base charge recovery for the water system is relatively low. It's currently about 21% of all the water revenues are recovered through the fixed base charges. But the utility industry recommended minimum is about 30%. The city's current water base charges are significantly below the average of nearby communities, whereas the current base charge for the city is $13.83 per month. The average of 10 neighboring communities is $33.31. Big difference. And the need for debt financing, which is a fixed cost, to support to fund or finance a part of the capital program supports the concept of increasing the base charge recovery. With respect to the current wastewater rates, these are the wastewater rates here. Again, we have the same issue where all customers pay the same minimum charge. So even if a customer has a greater demand on the system, they're paying the same base charge. And so again, once the meter size information is available and ready, we recommend that the city consider implementing base charges by meter size. Another issue with the wastewater rates is that restaurants and hotels with food service are charged higher volumetric rates due to an assumed higher strength waste. There's no consideration for possible pretreatment facilities or operating practices such as grease traps that result in normal strength wastewater. So as you can see, the restaurants and hotels or motels with food service are charged higher volumetric rates. But meanwhile, if there was if we added if the city added an industrial customer or schools with cafeterias or other customer types that might have higher strong waste, if they were added to the system, they would be charged this lower rate. So to us it's not a very equitable structure at this time. With respect to the proposed rate adjustments for 2021 and 2022, they're anticipated to enable the utility to hire the additional staff needed and to proceed with the first debt financing of critical capital needs. We did discuss rate options with the city's financial advisory board. We talked about possibly doing a one-time increase in 2021 versus phasing them over 2 years. We also talked about either implementing incremental changes to the rate design to address some of the equity issues, or just simply increasing the rates across the board. And the financial advisory board recommendation was for a one-time rate adjustment in 2021 with the rate design to address some of the equity issues. So the reasoning for this decision is due to the time value of money, the rates would be slightly higher in 2022 and more cash reserves would be depleted with rate phasing. The one-time rate adjustment places the utility in better financial position to address operating and capital needs beyond 2022. We're not going to be done after 2022. The system does have substantial capital needs that have to be addressed both over the next 2 years and beyond. And of course, as I mentioned, the rate design fixes certain equity issues with the current water and wastewater rate structures, and it's also promoting revenue stability for the water system. So the recommended one-time adjustment option, and again, the rates have not been adjusted for almost 6 years, is to increase the water revenues by 57% and the wastewater revenues by 36%, or a combined 46% for someone receiving both water and wastewater revenues. So what this would mean is that in 2021, someone an average single-family residential user of 10,000 gallons, that's the average monthly usage, would pay $152.85 per month. So, one thing to consider is how does that translate in terms of a cost per gallon? And that's 1.53 cents per gallon. So you can compare a gallon of water and sewer service to a gallon of some other commodity that you might purchase, such as bottled water or milk or gas. Another thing we consider is affordability.
Hey, Brian.
Yes, sir.
Sorry to interrupt. I'm actually getting a few texts from people who are saying that your mic is really rough. Do you have another way to maybe change out your mic? It sounds like something's rubbing against it, or I'm not exactly sure what the deal is, but it's on our end. It's not great.
Okay. Well, maybe I could call in if that would work.
Whatever you're doing now is okay. It sounded like something was brushing up against it quite a bit.
Oh, okay. Okay. Maybe it was all right. Are we good now? I raised my mic up. Maybe, who knows? Maybe it was brushing against my suit or something.
Yeah, that sounds a lot better actually. Is
Okay,
it better
good.
for other folks?
That's great.
Okay. Thanks. Sorry to interrupt, Brian.
Okay. Sorry about that. So when we consider the cost, again, we talked about the cost per gallon. Another thing we need to consider is affordability, and the EPA has published considers that 4.5% of median household is kind of considered the affordability threshold for a water and sewer bill. And this, if you do a Google search, this 4.5% is readily searchable. But by any based on the city's median household income, you can see that the rates would be considered affordable. It's well below 4.5%. So this, and that's important. We want to make sure that any rate recommendation would be considered affordable by industry standards. So the financial outlook with the recommended rate option, as you can see, with respect to unrestricted cash balances, whereas we're maintaining the cash position of the rates and of the utility system, whereas if we went with a phased option, the cash would continue to deplete. Also, with respect to debt service coverage, we're positioning the utility to have reasonable debt service coverage for the first financing. I mean, if you were a AA rated utility, there might be an expectation to have 200% debt service coverage. We're trying to just take baby steps to get to where we might need to be. But here shows kind of the kind of what we've been talking about, whereas these bars here represent the revenue requirements, and so this dark blue is the operating expenses, the green is debt service, and the purple is capital funding from rates, and this dotted red line here shows the revenues under existing rates. And so this illustrates what we were talking about before, whereas once we pay for operating expenses and debt service, we really don't have revenues to pay for anything else. And so the proposed rates, which again would be in 2021, and there would be no further increase in 2022, is programmed to meet all of these revenue requirements. So that the utility will be able to hire the additional personnel, issue the additional debt service, and pay some additional capital needs on a pay-as-you-go basis. With respect to the water rate design, we're proposing an increase in the water base charge to $32 per month. As I mentioned, the average of what others are charging is $33. So this is a little bit below the average of what the surveyed utilities charge, and this would achieve the recommended 30% water-based charge recovery in 2022. For residential customers, we're proposing basically 5 water price blocks. The first one is from 0 to 3,000 gallons for customers simply needing an essential service. And the remaining 4 price blocks are multiples of the capacity allocated to one equivalent residential unit. Basically, someone reserving capacity for the system is allocated 350 gallons per day, which translates to about 11,000 gallons per month. And so these price blocks could be considered indoor or essential usage price blocks, discretionary price usage price blocks, and excessive usage price blocks. Now, with respect to non-residential customers, we're recommending that non-residential customers be charged based on the volumetric average cost for 1,000 gallons, recognizing that most non-residential usage is essential, and the profit, it's not considered necessary for non-residential customers to have a tiered water rate structure, because most non-residential usage is essential, so there's no need for a discretionary or excessive usage block. And also the profit incentive discourages excessive water usage. So here are the proposed rates, where here you can see the five price blocks for residential usage, and then the single usage for volumetric rate for non-residential usage. With respect to the wastewater rate design, we're proposing an across-the-board or uniform increase in the minimum customer charge. As you can see, we're also recommending uniform volumetric rates to address some of what we consider to be an equity issue. So as you can see, whereas right now restaurants and hotels or motels with food or beverage service are charged a higher volumetric rate, we're proposing that basically all volumetric sewer usage is charged at the same volumetric rate. Now, the city could consider high strength surcharges for certain customers in the future. We would recommend that it be supported by empirical data, and certainly additional planning would be needed on how to fairly implement a testing program. Now, with respect to a comparison of monthly charges, just about all the rate options that we were looking at, we're putting the city between the town of Carbondale and the town of Minturn with respect to competitiveness. We know that the Minturn and Rifle have been increasing their rates recently to true up to their actual costs. I know that City Rifle just issued a RFP not long ago for another rate study. So, and the idea here is, the takeaway here is that all these utilities are reviewing their rates, and as time progresses, they'll be raising their rates, and so the city's rates will continue to be competitive. But when looking at a rate comparison, it is important to recognize that it's not a report card on how well a utility is performing, because there are a lot of different reasons why rates differ among utilities. It can be, sometimes you have customers that are spread out, and so there's more, it takes more pipe to get to them. Some utilities have more capital needs than others. Some have different water supplies. If you're treating salt water or brackish water, that's a higher, that's more expensive than a freshwater treatment process. So there are a lot of reasons why rates differ among utilities. And so again, it's not a report card on how well a utility is performing. So with respect to requested council action, the recommendation is to adopt the proposed interim restructured water and wastewater rates, which are recommended by the city's financial advisory board, recognizing that rates have not been adjusted in nearly 6 years. And the proposed rates, as we discussed, are considered affordable and competitive. And then once the city's new billing system is fully set up with the necessary customer billing determinants, we recommend preparing a multi-year financial forecast and reevaluating the rate design. And certainly would recommend considering an option such as fixed charges based on meter size. And that concludes presentation.
All right, questions for Brian? Go ahead, Paula.
I always seem to be first. Get it out there. My questions also might be for Matthew. Kind of looking through, Matthew, the intro to this when you gave us the staff report. I was a little confused, third paragraph down, and we talked about the city was transferring $80,000 in capital funds a year into the water, wastewater utilities for capital project cost, and that fund transfer of $800,000 was then planned to be reduced over the following 5 years by $160,000. So have we, for the last 5 years, been funding these capital projects through the city transferring that amount? Or what does that actually refer to? It sounds like we're still paying for stuff, but we're paying for it a different way.
So, and I apologize, that's a typo. They should both say $800,000. What used to happen about 5 years ago, and prior to that, was the city would transfer, the capital projects would transfer $800,000 a year into water and wastewater for capital projects. So it came right out of one fund and went into the other fund. Back in the 2014 study that was done, I think they recommended that be dropped $160,000 over the next 5 years. So it'd go from 800 to 640, 640 to 480, blah, 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 all the way down to zero, and basically force water, wastewater to reconsider what they're doing and fund their own capital projects. That older report suggested some rate increases to occur to accommodate that drop over the next 5 to 6 years. And those rate increases weren't exactly put into effect in full bore. So right now, back then, the $800,000 really helped with capital projects. Obviously, we're getting $800,000. We'd spend the $800,000 on capital projects, and whatever revenue was generated to fund the capital projects also. So as it dropped and nothing was done, you can see the cash reserves in Brian's chart start to drop. So basically we've been eating into cash reserves to accommodate these capital projects that we've been doing over the last few years. So, and now we're at the point where we need to reconsider what we're doing and say, okay, those cash reserves can only go so far down before they become problematic for us. It becomes a risk thing. So we need to start building those cash reserves back up and funding our capital projects all at the same time. So we've kind of put ourselves in a little bit of a hole over call it the last 5 years or so.
So, but I'm still trying to get clarity. That was $800,000 out of the water funds. That wasn't a transfer from city money into the wastewater funds. Is that correct?
Well, no, it was an $800,000 transfer from city capital projects fund.
The city has, in a sense, been paying for this up to this point. And is that the reason, or can you tell me the reason that nobody increased the rates, even though that was in that 2014 proposal to do that incrementally? What happened? Why did that not happen?
So I knew that question was going to come up, and I'm going to dance around it just a little bit.
Okay, I felt like we were dancing.
Oh, hold on. Deborah has her hand up. And so I don't know if she'll answer that question, but I was here in 2017, so I have a little bit of insight, but go ahead, Deborah.
I would say, Paula, I think it fell off the plate of the city in the 2015 budgeting process.
Okay.
And it never got brought back up again.
Okay. And then just for clarity, just from your perspective, Deborah, we were funding out of the city's budget into the water budget capital projects for the last 5 years.
Yes, I think in maybe the 2020 budget, it went down, right? As Matt said, it went down to $60,000 a year.
I understand that, right? I don't
believe we funded it at all in 2020.
Okay.
And I can't remember if we did in 2019 at all either. So we
Okay.
eliminated as pressures on that capital fund grew from all departments.
Okay. I just want clear. I was just kind of when I was reading, I was trying to figure out where that money was coming from. So thank you for that. And then this question is for Brian. So you mentioned that non-residential water is all considered essential. And I don't quite get that because I walk by the hospital or I walk by hotels and there's watering going on in the yards and that type of stuff. I mean, those are the non-essential that I look at. What do you consider non-essential for a resident, and why would that be different for a business?
Well, non-essential, of course, is considered anything that's um, that you would be for irrigation or and obviously once if you're just leaving the faucet on, then you're getting into the discretionary and excessive usage. I'm sorry, if you leave the irrigation on. But again, non-residential, I mean, I'm not saying that there's not wasteful usage among some commercial customers, but usually there is a profit motive, and usually in the industry it's not really considered necessary to have a conservation rate structure for commercial customers, because even though they may choose to overwater, but usually their water is essential, and it could be for just trying to keep the grounds in decent shape for customers.
Sure. And I have spent the last few years trying to xeriscape my yard in bits and pieces. So I think I'm kind of on that same thing. My concern is we are in a 20-year drought. And if we consider some of what our non-residential people are using for water, as that all of it's essential, that we're putting the wrong message across. And have you encountered that in other towns that you've worked with, as far as how do you define I'm going to throw it at the hospital just because I walk by it every day and I do see the water being used and that type of stuff, and I'm not blaming them, but how do you make the message to them going, you know what, you need to shut your water off outside. We're in a bad situation like this summer with the fire. How can we define that in however we set this rate structure up so that we make sure we take care of that if we get in a bind, which is a good possibility?
Well, you can implement water restrictions and say you can only water on these certain days during these certain times, and that fixes that problem immediately.
So then it becomes non-essential.
So what becomes non-essential?
When we say you can only water or you can't water, then that water usage they may typically do based on profit motive becomes really non-essential water. I'm just kind of concerned in our situation in this town, especially when we're looking at trying to take care of the repercussions of a fire and the fact that we're in a drought, that there would be some kind of perception on the non-residential side that they can do what they want, So I just want to make sure that when we set this up, however we set it up for billing and what we decide, that we're doing a service to the community.
Well, there's actually a trend in the industry to actually go away from water conservation rate structures, because whereas there used to be a philosophy that you needed these inverted price blocks to have water conservation. Right now, there's you see a lot of utilities that have just a single volumetric rate for all water usage. The idea being that if you use more, you are going to pay more, and that does encourage water conservation. You will use more if you will pay more if you use more.
Well, I know we're not as extreme as Las Vegas, but I do know they're pretty proactive on saving every drop of water down in that town from some information that I've read and seen. So I just want to make sure we have that messaging. And Matthew, maybe that's a question towards you or Deborah, but when we decide what we're going to do tonight, I just want to be conscious of that.
Well, and just so you know, Paula, we're still raising the rates. So they're still going to pay a fair share of what they're doing. But when you look at it, I don't know if Brian can bring it up or not, what the consumptive use is in town, whether it's commercial or residential or irrigation, raw water kind of usage, residential usage is extremely high. So if you want to conserve water and force people to conserve water, you start making those blocks in the residential more and more expensive. So the people who do own those large yards with huge gardens and everything start doing what you're doing and start to zero-scape a little bit more. So, and then you also have to balance out the whole conversation with, we still need the water department to make enough money to keep the system up and running. So it's that fine balance between conservation, forcing conservation, and still making enough money to run the water system itself. And then when we do hit drought years, just like we had this year, last year, and we have problems like we did with the fire, things that randomly pop up, we still have that ability to say, hey, you guys need to cut back on water because we're not going to be able to produce as much as we were, and then put those force them into water conservation, which is why we grabbed, the first people that got hit this year with those conversations were the big irrigation users, the schools, the parks, and we all hit them and said, okay, we're going to put you on a schedule now. You can't water when you want to. We're going to tell you when you can water, and if it was worse than that, we would tell them they can't water on certain days or those effects. So it's really a fine balance between conserving water, knowing how much water we have, and still selling enough water that we are not shooting ourselves in the foot to be able to operate and continue to do capital improvements that we need to do.
Well, that's a good thing to be aware of. Thank you. Absolutely. Thank you. I'm sure I'd come up with 10 more questions, but I see other people want to.
Yeah, we have about 21 minutes left before our next one. I will say, Paul, I think it's an important question of, well, how have we gotten here and why haven't we raised rates? And, like I said, I can't speak about the councils before us, before Shelley and I. I'll speak on behalf of her, I guess, for a second. If Shelley wants to jump in and correct me, that's fine. But when we got on in 2017, so the rates already been decided for 17. I don't know why, again, in 15 and 16, they didn't raise rates, possibly because they just had a rate increase or very shortly thereafter. And then I think by 2018, Financial Advisory Board was already talking about this infrastructure tax that failed last April. And so I think a lot of this conversation was, well, we have this capital improvement and this capital improvement with electric and water and sewer, and that was all tied up in that street tax. And so I think that really kind of stopped the conversation, because if it passes, this is one conversation. If it doesn't pass, it's another conversation. So I think that was part of it. And also, we had to move the MOC and drain some of the reserves as well. So I think a lot of this, and these are all excuses, of course, but I think that every year there was another reason, like, oh, well, we'll deal with that next year when we figure it out. And then there was the ERP. And, once that gets going, then we'll really have this hard conversation. So I think there's always been a reason why we're always going to have this hard conversation in 6 months, whether it be a tax, whether it be MOC, the ERP, any other acronym. And I think that's why we're here. And that's my recollection, at least from my time on council. So I don't know if that sheds any light on the conversation or not, but it would have been better if we would have just bumped them up 4 to 6% every year. We wouldn't be having this hard conversation right now. So I get it.
Well, I hope we keep that in mind in the future, that these basic things that we need, we take care of first. So that's the way I'm looking at it.
Mm-hmm. All right, Shelley.
Sorry, had to unmute myself. Yeah, and that's my recollection also, Jonathan, is that, we've been hearing about this rate study coming for probably a year or a little over a year. So, that kind of put off the conversation also. And it's just hard to talk about raising rates. And I think that's a good reason for us to consider, once we get the ERP system in place or we have all that meter size data that we need, that we look at building in kind of a tracking with inflation or something where we kind of have automatic rates updates at least come onto the docket, for consideration, so that it doesn't get forgotten about, or it doesn't get put off thinking, well, the fund balance is looking okay, so we'll put off a rate increase for another year, because then it's harder if you have to make a bigger jump, as we're having to do now, to kind of do some catch up. I guess my questions, and whether this is for Brian or Matt, you guys can kind of answer it, but Brian, you made the comment that the non-residential use is usually higher than the residential. So I understand that, and certainly restaurants, hotels, they have kind of a baked in use that goes along with the number of customers they're serving and that kind of thing. And also the big users, schools, hospitals, when we're in non-COVID, have a lot of use also. So I'm wondering, is it really necessary that we wait until we look at the service size to charge a different base fee for residential customers versus non-residential? Because right now, when I think about non-residential usage, that's part of their business. They're serving customers, but they also, for them, that's a business write-off. It's a business expense. That's recovered in their business model, and it's baked in there. When we're charging them we're charging then our residential customers the same base fee as we're charging businesses. A residential customer does not get that write-off. They do not get cost recovery on their water. It's part of their home. And I'm concerned about that burden on our lower income customers and our seniors that are on a fixed income, things like that. So I guess and the water, I appreciate, that baked in kind of 0 to 3,000 gallons as being a rate that kind of takes that into account. It gives a lower rate for people who may be living in an apartment, or, they've got, they're not irrigating, and they're can keep their rates lower. But it seems like then we get to sewer and we're hitting everybody with that $90.88. And is there a way to lessen the burden again on those lower water users that are residential and that don't get a business write-off for that cost, and still kind of balance that out some way? So what are your thoughts on that? Because that's a concern for me.
Well, it comes down to just having the right customer billing determinants to be able to create a fair structure for both the residential and the commercial customers. And I think that, when we have the updated billing determinants, we'll be able to have create some a fair structure for all customers. Right now, I'm not sure that we have the necessary detail in order to create a fair discrepancy or difference between residential and commercial customers.
So you can't base that on historic usage of the commercial customer versus a residential, like maybe have different classes of commercial customers. If you're in this level of usage, you pay a different base fee.
Well, usually the base fee is dependent upon there are different demands on the system. I'm just not sure that we have all the necessary customer statistics available to just create a differential rate structure at this point.
So a hotel that has, say, 100 rooms or something is paying the same base fee that a senior couple living in a fixed income in an apartment is paying.
That's correct.
Right?
That's
I
correct.
I have a problem with that equity wise.
Me too.
I think we're putting a big burden on our residential customers. So that would be my comment, is I'd like to figure out a way to adjust that. And I think, Matt, we still have the same thing going on electric. So we've had this discussion before, and I just feel like we need to get a handle on that some way in our utility billing.
And I don't think I disagree with you at all, Shelley. But what Brian's kind of trying to tiptoe around is we can make some assumptions and then throw those assumptions at high use businesses and try to be as fair as possible. But Paula brought it up. It's very interesting because I was in Las Vegas and I saw my uncle's water bill and I saw how they bill off of it. I was like, that is brilliant. Why aren't we doing this, to be honest with you? And it's basically based off meter sizes. So if you have a residential 5/8 inch meter, it costs you $30 a month as a base fee. If you have a 12-inch meter, because you need one, is like $3,000 a month. So really what we're trying to do right now is balance out what the deficiency we have. We're going to start running out of money very, very quickly over the next year. We would keep Brian and Gov rates basically on contract. As soon as we have all of the metering information that they need, we would kind of do this. And I think that what you're going to find out is that if there's 100 commercial businesses out there and we decide to charge them $1,000 a month for their meter, you're not having a huge impact swing one way or the other when it comes to financials, because a lot of the money is coming from the rates themselves, not the meter fees. There's only like 3,700 meters. If you change the cost for a meter per month, it's, $37,000 a month. Okay. It's $400,000 a year. You can play with it a little bit. But then when you go back and look at it, that's $66 a month for those that we were charging for sewer. Basically that covers our debt service on a $24 million lift station and new wastewater plant. So
Right.
there's a lot of things, and Brian and I and Steve and everybody have been going back and forth on how to accommodate for this. Right now we need to do something. And
right.
It needs to be fairly significant, but we do need to look at, and Brian brought it up right away, is like, how do we get these meter sizes? And unfortunately they exist on pieces of paper, not in a system anyplace. So we're trying to figure out how to get them, put them into there, and then relook at this whole entire thing. And at the end of the day, yes, it'll change commercial billing a little bit. It'll change residential billing a little bit, but it's not going to be the huge swing one way or the other that I think that everybody thinks it's going to be. Because
and I realize that, but I guess my point is that $30 a month additional charge on a residential customer to some people is a big impact.
And it's only $19.
And Shelley and Matt, just we have 10 minutes left scheduled for this session. I have 2 more hands up. And so if we can at least get through the questions and then bring it back for discussion, that'd be great. We might end up needing another work session in the future to have a discussion, because I don't want to rush this. So
I think
sorry,
that's
Shelley.
my question. So go ahead.
Okay. Charlie and then Tony.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. So a couple of things. It seems to me that we could pretty much conclude that because the rates have been increased over the last 6 years, that the proposed rate increase is a much bigger jump than and therefore an immediate impact that people would have seen. They would have seen this over the 6 years had it gone up each year. Is that an accurate assessment?
Well, if we had taken the rate increases that were suggested in the 2014 report and applied them to the situation, we would have actually raised rates in the wrong spot. Wastewater rates would have gone up somewhere between 43 and 72%, depending on which number we picked to use. And water rates would have only gone up 35%. So basically, we have thrown way more information at Brian than the 2014 report was really using. So we've calculated pretty precisely where we need to go over the next 10 years with this rate study. And if we had continued on with 2014 suggestions, rates would have gone up more than this lump sum at this point. So we
That's for both residential and commercial users?
Yes. And we basically, the city has been supplementing water and wastewater fees to the residents at this point while watching our revenues and our cash in hand go down.
I understand that. So we can't change what wasn't done the last 6 years. I just think it's important as we talk about this, that it's clear that had we raised rates in some fashion, whether the way they recommended in 2014, if we'd raised in some fashion, we wouldn't have this 57% jump. That's correct.
Correct.
Right.
Okay. Just to comment on what Shelley said, Shelley, I agree that it's a write-off. I think that you also have to understand that if we charge more to the commercial people, they're going to increase their prices. And so it has an impact on our citizens, whether it's direct or indirect. So I just think we got to keep that in mind. And I'm not an expert on what those impacts would be. I guess the last question I have, and I think I understand it, but I don't know if it's come clear here for people watching, is, Brian, you've indicated you need more data. Is that just the meter sizes, or is there other data you need to be able to get a more equitable rate structure, for lack of a better term?
Yeah, there's a lot of different there's a lot of different rate structures that could be explored. One is to charge multifamily based on the number of units. For example, you could have the same size meter for.
Let me stop, Brian. Brian, I apologize for interrupting. And maybe I wasn't clear my question. What data do you need? You said you need more data. I'm trying to understand what data you need so that we know what you're looking for, so we can get to what you're talking about, how we create this other rate structure. What's the missing data?
The meter size by each for each customer by class, and also possibly the number of units behind the meter for master metered or multifamily units, so that we can explore some of the more equitable rate structures.
And how are we going to get that data after today?
The answer to that question, and I'll answer that one, is that we have the data. It's just in a very hard form to gather. And when we slow down, hopefully November, December, a little bit in the wastewater department, we're going to have somebody start organizing the data into a database that we can utilize. We can get information from our meter provider, but it's not specific enough information to use or detailed enough information to use. But we're going to work on that basically over the winter, get that information to Brian, have him reorganize it, and then we'll come back to you guys again sometime next year and have that conversation. But I think once again, you'll see that it's not going to make a huge swing in the bills one way or the other. You know, it's still $66 a month for waste right now, which people think is fairly high. We're increasing it to get back to where we need to be, which is what we would have done. Actually, we would have raised it way too much. It'd have gone up almost 70%, you know, if we had followed the previous study. So I'm kind of glad we are where we are. We have very good infrastructure information now, and we have very good consultant to work with that it will help us step through all of this. So.
And Charlie, I'm going to, oh, great. That worked out well that you were actually done. I was about to cut you off. Tony, you're next, and then hopefully we can have a short conversation before we have to move on. But go ahead, Tony.
Well, I'm just going to make a short comment because I don't have any questions. I think our rate structure is extraordinarily high. Our water rates are way too high. I think 2020 couldn't be you couldn't pick, Shelley and Paula, a worse year to consider a rate increase. I think I really appreciate, Brian, the presentation, but I think comparing milk to water is like comparing apples to oranges, although they're probably cheaper. I think water is essential and milk is important, but it's just doesn't fly for me. I think our water rates are high because, you know, I think Charlie and Shelley touched on it with the sewage thing, but our waste, you know, comparing us to other communities is important, but then you throw in that other thing. And my water rates are extraordinarily high, higher than they were actually in Aspen. And I know that was several years ago, but I would oppose at this time, and I know this is a longer conversation, Mr. Mayor, but at this time, any rate increases. Thank you.
Thanks, Tony. Steve Davis.
I appreciate the fact that I understand how we got where we got to, but I would have no appetite for a 57% increase at one time. And I think that I don't think there's anybody in this community that would stomach that very well. I would, however, personally, agree to a phased in increase and no more than 20% per year, and even 20% I think is extremely high. But we have to get to a point sooner than later that that it'll actually pay for itself. So that's me.
Thanks, Steve. I would say I support that as well. I think Tony, I don't disagree with you at all. This is a horrible time to be raising rates, but at the same time, we're going to run out of money, and we don't have the ability to add, unilaterally tax. We don't have the ability to do that. We don't have the ability to take it anywhere else, really. So I think pulling the Band-Aid off and doing 57% at once was maybe a conversation we could have had. It's probably the fiscally responsible thing to have done, given that we haven't raised rates incrementally. But it's probably the fiscally responsible thing that we could have considered 8 months ago, before COVID, before the Grizzly Creek fire, before all of this. I think, good middle ground is to phase it in and not kill our businesses and our residents with a near 60% increase right away. So I really support Councilor Davis's viewpoint on that. Real quick, go around the table again. Deborah. Deborah?
Sorry, my mouse is not behaving. I would just recommend that you guys take your time discussing this. Obviously, it's a really hard conversation, and that is why communities have such a hard time doing this. So I don't think we want to rush you. I think we can have more work sessions. I think you should talk to the public and just take your time.
All right. Thank you. We'll go 5 minutes over. So it's 4:29 right now. So Paula, Shelley, and Charlie can keep the comments brief. That would be awesome.
Yeah, I agree with Steve. I think we're going to have to figure out a way to phase this in. I think it wouldn't be ripping the Band-Aid off. We'd be skinning people alive. So I'd like to see us figure out a way to just maybe Matthew could set up something, a different work session where he shows a phased program instead of a one-time program.
All right, thanks. Shelley.
I agree with that also. I think we need to figure out a way to phase it, just because this has been tough, such a tough year for everyone. But we do need to be responsible. Water is traditionally and historically undervalued. And especially in the West, and what's going on with prolonged droughts, it needs to be valued much higher. And maybe it is more than milk. Water is not cheap, and it won't get any cheaper going forward. So we need to value it properly. I don't know exactly what that value is, but I guess I like the idea to talk to people. If we don't need to make a decision tonight, then let's see when it will be on the agenda in the future. But I do want to look at having some kind of annual rate increase or buy-in, every other year, kind of built into our system. And I'd also like to work on some equity for our smaller users, so that the larger users are paying more of the O&M cost, paying their fair share, and making it a little, easing the burden on some of our smaller residential customers.
Thanks, Shelley. And Brian, do you have, I know it was presented because I saw it along with Paula and Charlie, the phased approach. Can you turn it to that slide?
Yeah, I can. This was another option that we were looking at through in discussions with the Financial Advisory Board. One would be to increase water revenues by 35% in 2021 and 17% in 2022, and wastewater revenues by 17% in both 2021 and 2022. On a combined basis, it'd be 25% in 2021 and 17% in 2022. And so we looked at interim rate design and also uniform or across the board. As you can see, any of the options that were discussed would be considered affordable as far as EPA standards. The disadvantage of the phased approach, as I mentioned, these are one-time adjustments and these are phased adjustments. As you can see, whereas the one-time adjustment kind of, I guess, rips the Band-Aid off, as everyone is saying, and immediately starts funding the revenue requirements. With the phased approach, we're not meeting all of our revenue requirements in 2021, and so we wind up depleting more cash. And that does put the utility in a worse financial position for beyond 2022, and it just means that at some point we'll have to make up the difference. So it's, but I understand all the perspectives that have been communicated here, and but certainly, as we talked about, it's we are kind of playing catch up here and having to figure out some sort of solution.
Thanks, Brian. You can just keep that up if you'd like. Tony, go ahead.
Oh, now I'm unmuted. Just real quick, I think I've made myself clear I'm against any rate hike at this time. But also, don't just presume like the hospital and the school district are going to have serious financial issues, or our business community are in any better position than my mother on a fixed income to pay a higher rate. So I'm concerned about how that would affect them too. So that's my final comment. Thank you.
Thanks, Tony. Steve Davis.
Just because I brought up the phasing, I would say I understand that we would have to make up the difference, and I would assume that we would be doing that in year 4 or 5, as we would actually increase beyond what would be required to make up that difference.
Thanks, Charlie. Last comment, question.
Thanks. Yeah, I think kind of what I was going to comment has been covered, so I'll do it quickly. Steve Davis just said exactly what we have to deal with. I think we have to examine ripping the Band-Aid off, as I call it, or talking about even a higher cost over a longer period of time. And we don't have that information in front of us in a detailed sense tonight. 1 hour is not enough time to talk about this kind of a significant issue. It's going to be my recommendation that we hold I know everybody loves special council meetings, but this is an important issue, not only to us as a council. We have to talk about long-range planning, not in-your-face short-range planning, and we need to get significant public input on this issue. So I'm going to recommend that we schedule somewhere before the end of the year a special council meeting and invite the public to that meeting to give us input.
All right. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Brian, as well, for the presentation and all the hard work that you and our staff, utilities and finance staff has done. So this is the best we've been through. I think three of these rate studies over the years, and this is by far the best and most comprehensive one I've ever seen. So I really appreciate that. We are running behind a bit, but let's just roll right into the next work session, which is the airport board commission. One of the two. Terry, would you like to lead it off? I will promote folks on the airport board to be panelists while you're leading off.
Please, yes, thank you. I'm going to just bring up the airport report that was developed by Amy Helm, who is on the line from New Zealand. And I think I will offer to just change the pages as we go through, and I will allow Greg Rippey, our airport board chairman, to take the lead on explaining all of the different items in the report. Greg, do you want to start us off with the list of items?
You know, you have control of it, and so I don't see anything that you're displaying at this point.
Oh, shoot. Okay, let me make sure that you can see my screen. Everybody can see my screen.
There we go, Terry.
Okay, good. All right. Maybe I'll just kind of give more of an introduction, and then we can start into the specific items. The airport board has developed this annual report that they'd like to go through all those specifics with the airport, and also talk about a few specific issues. They'd like to talk about operation expenses, the CDOT economic impact study, operational improvements that are needed at the airport, community outreach that's occurred at the airport, the Grizzly Creek Fire Helibase, and then items to look ahead with, relocating the fuel to the south end, hangar demand and Classic Air Medical, temporary storage containers, Armstrong Consultants, and Southbridge. So I will allow Greg to go from there. Greg, can you see the screen?
Mostly. First of all, Mayor, councilors, thank you for this chance to get before you and tell you the story of Glenwood Airport once again. As you can well imagine, that this has been an interesting year. We first were closed down for COVID out of an abundance of caution. We were closed for another 2 weeks as we allowed the firefighting activities to base at Glenwood Airport. On revenues and expenses, we're going to be once again in the black. And as you know, we're an enterprise within the city. And so we depend on these revenues and try and control our expenses so that we maintain a fund balance as we go forward. So, Terry, next slide, please. Can you? So these are our fuel sales, and our fuel sales have been doing very good this summer, with the exception of the times that we have been shut down. I don't know if it's pent-up demand, whether we're just very competitive in the aviation fuel market on the western slope of Colorado, but we've been seeing a big increase year over year in our fuel sales. And one of the big markups that we have is on Jet A, and the majority Jet A user that buys Jet A at Glenwood Airport is Classic Air. I think the number, and we've got it in another slide somewhere, they purchase about 86% of the jet fuel that we send out there. We're very cognizant of the fact that we have helicopters coming in very close to residential areas. We've just purchased and received this week a longer hose for the Jet A so that we can not move a lot, but move some distance and hopefully mitigate the impact to residentials. In our long-term outlook, and what we'd like to do that you'll see later, is move all those helicopter operations and fueling operations clear to the south end, near the area where the South Bridge would come across. Go ahead. These are our current fees. Ground lease, well, you can read it. I'm not going to read it to you. And when you look at that, one of the things we had to clarify in our commission meeting today was that if there's a hangar that has 2 airplanes in it, they're paying double fees. So even on the ground lease, when we see what's there and it says 600, if there's a hangar out there that has 2 aircraft in it, they're paying for each aircraft, not just the hangar itself. Those are pretty current, I think, today. Maybe instead of 60 planes, we have 55 planes based at Glenwood Springs. You can read the rest of it. The mayor was a little bit surprised today that we have 5 helicopters based there. And we have 5 helicopters that are permanently based there and up to 4 more seasonally. We happen to have a helicopter that is out there right now doing pole transport to replace some of the XL power poles that were burned down in the Grizzly Creek fire. So we're estimating our fees for this year are $110,000, and you can see that's up substantially. The bulk of that is during the Grizzly Creek fire, we had a land use agreement with the federal government for $1,500 to rent the airport and $500 a day per craft. It was interesting as Amy, our airport manager who has moved on down to New Zealand, submitted the bill to him. They says, well, we don't think this is right. We think it's more. And we think it's more because we've still had aircraft out there. We only charged them for the time that we actually had the airport closed. When was the last time you had the federal government come to you and say, I think we owe you more? But we didn't take the extra because in our mind, we had that fee for when the airport was closed, not when, because they were still paying a per aircraft fee, even though they were using some of the infield area. Next. I'm getting feedback on my. Interesting.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just getting feedback, hearing myself. So every 3 years, Colorado Department of Transportation Aeronautics does an economic impact study. And you can see the numbers that they have there. It's estimated that the annual impact is $36.67 million in the community through both on-airport activity and visitor spending. Now, anyone can challenge the methods that they use. We put this in there, and they do this for every airport in Colorado. And so we can take a look at it and say that's what CDOT and their economic advisors have come up with as far as the economic impact. And I'd have to say, even myself at the face of it, I go, that's a pretty big number, and we'll just leave it at that. But I like it.
I'll scroll through, Greg, a little bit. I think these were some of the large users, I think, that were a part of that economic study. Classic Air Medical, Neil Rhoda Aviation Consultants. And I think Amy wanted to highlight some of the other activities that occur at the airport, including, Flight for Life, Children's Hospital Search and Rescue, Angel Flight, Grizzly Creek Fire, etc. And I think
I'd like to highlight the Young Eagles. We have a group of about 10 young Eagles that are going through a program through the Experimental Aircraft Association to introduce them to aviation, and that's been a really well-received program for youth in the community to be exposed to aviation.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So this is the front cover of that economic report.
Yeah, and you have all this in your packet, so I'm not going to go through it. You can take a look at it and look at their how they calculate.
See, these are some of the operational improvements.
Addition of Jet A fuel, we completed that in 2018. We are looking to increase that. What we have is a 500-gallon tank there, and we have a truck that we put the fuel in, and then we transport it into that 500-gallon tank. And, you know, we can sometimes run through that fuel in a day. The next one, selling of abandoned aircraft. I think with legal staff, we have solved that. And we are actually, and the city has published notice on it. And so we're going to get rid of 2 aircraft that are there and deemed abandoned. And we will recover $15,000 from the salvage company over in Greeley. We're looking at do a minor expansion of the helipad, and we do need council approval for this. The reason for that is Classic Air is now using that hangar that is in the middle of the screen, and the helipad that is there is surrounded by grass and dirt, and they would like to pave that so that they don't have a bunch of dust blowing up and a bunch of rocks and potential damage to their helicopters when they put a helicopter on that. Also just widening out going into the hangar. This is a minor expansion. We've run it by, it doesn't affect our swamp plan at all. And the cost would be borne not by the airport, but by Classic Air. Talked about the Young Eagles. You can read about it in more detail. One of the cool things we were able to do when we had the airport closed for COVID, it turned out to be a wonderful place to have high school graduation for Glenwood Springs High School. And it was simulcast. All the cars were on the runway with the families in it. And Ron Milhorn hosted it. Great speaker that was there. And so you just sat in your car like a drive-in movie, turned on the radio and listened to the speakers. Very unique and very nice that we were able to make that happen for the high school. There you see the students outside their vehicles that the families are in. There's a bird's eye picture of it, and you can see how many people are there in the middle of the runway. As the Grizzly Creek fire just really blew up, and as you know, it was at one point the most important fire in the United States. That's before California and Oregon blew up. We had, I'm trying to read that, how many pounds of cargo that it did, how many gallons of retardant. And these are numbers that we got from the Forest Service. It was an invaluable asset to the community. Now, and we also heard, hey, you don't really need an airport to be able to do this. But if you, as you can see, every aircraft there had its own support team there. There were firefighters that were camped at the airport. Each one had a fuel truck for it. And if you talk to any of the crews, they said this is absolutely the best helibase we've ever had fighting a fire. Thank you so much for making it available. People ask, well, why couldn't you just go to Carter Jackson's field, or why couldn't you use some other big open space? The hard surface is really valuable to them, and it helps their operations a lot. The other point on, I'm trying to remember my second point on the helibase. So I'll take questions on any of these as we go forward, but there's
Greg,
the photos in
they
it.
had their own air traffic control tower they brought in.
Yeah, it did have an air traffic control tower. So for 2 weeks, Glenwood Springs had a control tower at it, but it was just necessary for safety.
And they were able to dispatch and control without being concerned with other aircraft having to work in on that. It made an enormous difference in their response time and being able to come in and leave.
Oh, I know what I was going to say. You know, we had the conversation. You know, why can't you use Rifle or Eagle? They actually did have two large helicopters based at Eagle, but there's so much traffic conflict of trying to get them out of there that sometimes they could be held in Eagle for up to 15 minutes for incoming and outgoing traffic. And they says, you know, we've got our own air traffic base here, and we can just go as we need it as soon as we get the call. And, you know, that really came to light one day, and I was out there at the airport, and that's when we had the lightning strike up Red Canyon. And they were on it with 5 helicopters within 10 minutes. And so we were lucky that we had them there. We might have had another fire very, very close to more residents than Grizzly Creek was. So I indicated that we want to relocate the Jet A fuel station, and we want to do that in recognition of the proximity to Park East and some of the other housing that is even across the river, get it as far as we can away. We have 50 people who are interested in leasing or building new hangars. That's a discussion that we need to go forward with council, saying, okay, what would a master plan look like? And here in a little bit, we'll talk about Armstrong Consultants, which we're going to be asking you to agree to a professional services agreement so we can be more professional in our planning. Classic Air would love to build a new hangar facility there. It would encompass a longer lease than the leases that are probably out there right now, because it's a significant capital investment. And for them to put that money in, they'd have to have some certainty on how long they could be there. That's some schematics of what it would look like. You saw before Rota Aviation, Njord Rota, Ravco, and he came to us about 2 years ago, and I think he had been to P&Z, asking for the possibility to just have a Connex box there to put some supplies in there, and that has been denied. And we would like to revisit it. They're very temporary structures that is zoned light industrial out there. I think it is a use that would be appropriate for light industrial. And so we will be talking to you again about that possibility. As I spoke about Armstrong Consultants, they have given us a professional service agreement. Please note that it's only on a task order basis. There is no spending until you give them a task, and it would be a not to exceed, and it would all come out of the enterprise fund. Those are the type of task items we may be asking for them to do, even fuel system improvements. Can we get more hangars in there? Is there a different way to look at the airport layout? A master plan, and other items as deemed necessary. Southbridge, and thank you to Terry and her team for engaging the board with Jacobs in what their plans are coming down through there, and how we can help them, and how we can have a better outcome there as we look at phasing the South Bridge into phase 1, and then for the interim having traffic go around to the south. So we've had multiple meetings with the engineer at Jacobs, and I think it's been very helpful to all parties. There's our forecast there, and that was 2020. And as you can see that right now we're looking at an increase of fund balance of $45,000. Even though that says a decrease there, that's not true. And we may see that on. We did review what you are going to be looking at for the budget in 21. We agree with the budget as presented for the airport to council.
And
We
this
don't
is
need to
more
go
about
through
the
all.
economic study. Do you want to focus on anything in here, Greg?
No, that's
Okay.
not necessary.
I'll flip through the rest of these pages, and I think that most of it is a part of that economic study. So we may be at the discussion part of the meeting. This is just an article about the fire here. So, and all that's in the packet if you'd like to take another look at it. So from here, I guess the council and the board can have some questions and have some discussion.
Questions for anybody on the board, for anybody on council? Take your turns. There we go. Go ahead, Paula. You're muted, Paula.
Always wait for somebody else to jump in first, but hey, just get my questions done.
Nope.
Greg, thank you very much. And Terry, thank you for putting that together. It was great to catch up on the airport commission and what's happening at the airport.
I'm sorry, I have to admit that Amy from the airport did that. It wasn't my work, so nice job, Amy.
Thank you, Amy, and hope you're doing well in New Zealand. That's great.
She was on our call earlier today. It was 2:30 in the morning, and so she jumped on the call at 2:30 this morning in New Zealand to help with the continuity.
Yeah. She has a lot of personal, and she is muted right now. If you could unmute her, I'm not sure. Come up, yep.
So, Greg, I just saw the airport story in the local Glenwood Post as well, and I just noticed that there was, I should just read it, but it talks about the runway being 3,305 feet did not meet the 2020 objective, and there were other things that did not meet objectives as well. Is that all addressed in some of the stuff that you're talking about the consulting firm looking at, or is that above and beyond that?
First of all, I have to say I don't know what objectives of the runway length they were talking about. I didn't write the article. It's been 3,300 feet long since the mid 50s, which, by the way, I did fly in and out of there in the mid 50s, believe it or not. Some of the other things, you know, if you look back at the Gruen report, which you're all in possession of, it's a little over a year old, that says we are not FAA compliant. The reason we are not FAA compliant is because the mountain to the east of us would go into a plane of a 3-to-1 from centerline. We can't, unless we were to tear the mountain down, we couldn't be FAA compliant. Everything else we do there is in compliance with FAA standards and best practices.
Okay, but that's not really the CDOT's Division of Aeronautics report. That's something different, correct?
The Gruen was the South Glenwood land use study.
Okay, all right. Just to be clear in my head, I'm learning as we go. Can you explain, or somebody from the commission explain, why our prices for our fuel are so much cheaper than others in the region?
Well, actually, you got the report from Terry, and we spent a lot of time looking at that. If you look at how we compare to rifle, we're very similar. We are going to, Tim Hasselman is going to do a little broader study than what Linda Dupriest did, where we are not so much lower. And I can tell you that on Jet A, even at our price, we have a $2 per gallon margin on it. We have a $1 per gallon margin. There you go. And so today we're at 4, and you have to look at the difference between self-serve and full. Grand Junction is $4.30, so we're only 30 cents a gallon less than Grand Junction. we're only 90 cents less than Rifle. We're going to do a more intensive study that are airports that are similar to our size, that have similar type of amenities for them. And in the report that Linda and Terry had shared with you, they talk about some of the services that are there. Every airport that you see on there, with the exception of Glenwood Municipal, is a 24-hour-a-day airport. They're lit, and we believe one of the reasons our fuel sales are up is because we are a relative bargain. I would not use the term we're so much cheaper than. I think we're value. And, you can look at jet fuel costs in Rifle, Aspen, and Eagle and see that they're just incredibly high. But that's because they're able to get that from people flying in $30 to $50 million jets. And that extra $3 a gallon probably doesn't affect whether they're going to come into Aspen or not.
But you are looking at a possible fuel increase, a price increase?
We increase as we're comfortable at this point with the $1 a gallon margin. If we get our next load and we get about 5,000 to 7,000 gallons per load, we would increase it accordingly. But right now, that one's working for us.
Okay.
We can't ever prove what the price elasticity is, but go down South Grand and see how many more cars are in stinkers than there are in the station across the street from them. It's just, and one of the things that's interesting, and probably most council doesn't know that, but when a pilot's just flying, he can pull up on his iPad or even on their screen the current prices of fuel, just like you can if you're using Waze or something like that in aircraft, and you can say, okay, I can fuel at Glenwood for $4, or if I want to go out of my way a little bit for a direct route and go to Steamboat, it's $4.57. So pilots know as they're flying around exactly what everybody's pricing is.
Okay. One last question. It's based around fuel as well. So you'll have to correct me if I'm wrong, but you're looking at a 240% increase in having an expanded fuel available. If I remember reading that somewhere. And what does that translate to for additional or expanded air traffic in our skies?
I don't know of which comment you're speaking to, a 240%.
Well, if you increase the availability of fuel at the airport, let me put it that way, do you then see that we'd see increased air traffic in our valley?
No, and please understand that as we talk about trying to improve Glenwood, it is not this commission nor the pilot community's wish to have more aircraft come in there. We know we're in a small valley. We deeply cherish the existence of Glenwood Springs Airport, but we also know if it was just one plane after another coming in all the time, that would not be favorable with the citizens. So, but we've had that 50 to 60 number of aircraft out there for probably the last 10 years. And that's a pretty good number. So when we even talk about, okay, we could get more planes in there if we had more hangar expansion. If we're talking about hangar expansion, we're not talking about another 50 planes in there. And that's part of what Armstrong would be helping us go in. But if we could bring in another 5, some of the ones that are, you've got an investment in an aircraft, and some of them are having to stay outside all year, which is tough on them.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks, Paula. Charlie.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Greg, and the airport board for looking at these issues. I think it's a really good summary of what's going on. It really has helped me to have a better understanding. It probably is as difficult, but I guess I want to raise the elephant in the room, and that is things have not been approved, I think, because the city council hasn't made a decision, for lack of a better term, on the future of the airport. And we're talking about spending $10,000 on a study, which I understand why the airport board would want to do that. But I think we're all doing a disfavor to everyone without addressing that issue. And it's a big issue. It's going to involve a lot of people. And I don't have an opinion one way or the other at this point of what that should be. But it seems to me that we're avoiding that decision or direction. And without that, I find it really hard to spend more money or to say, yeah, go out and do this or do that. Because I don't know if that's the right thing. I don't want to be able to spend money if there's a decision that this operation is not going to continue. On the other hand, if it's going to continue, I think we got to get the study done about how best to make this operation be a good operation, a good profitable, but not profitable, but I'm looking at meeting the needs of the people that are using it in an efficient fashion. So that's my comment on where we are. And again, I'm not opining what we should do. I just think we need to get down and have that discussion.
Thanks, Charlie. Tony.
And I agree with Charlie, but I've done a bit of a 180. Mr. Merritt and Mr. Rippey, I don't know if that's like return to the airport or something when you're in a plane, but I think we saw during this fire and at other times, and when I've been out there, and it's not just the airport, it's also the graduation, but also the hospital's needs, that we need to figure out a way how to keep this airport and keep it intact. Because if it's a resource that if we just do away with, whatever that happens, then we're never going to get it back. It's gone forever. And if that's the community decision, fine. But that hasn't been the community consensus. So I support Charlie, certainly more discussion. But I will tell you, if you wanted my position and you hold a gun to my head tonight, we need to plan to keep it and work around it with our other needs. Thank you.
Thanks. Any other questions, comments? Go ahead, Shelley.
Sorry, I'm trying to mute and raise my hand at the same time, and sorry. I just want to thank everybody from the airport board and interested in the airport being here tonight. I agree with Charlie and Tony. I think there's more conversation that needs to be had, and you know, whether that means something like Armstrong, which does a study on the airport, or whether it's something that's driven also by city council and understanding, you know, working in the needs of Southbridge into the whole planning of that area. You know, I think that's a really important discussion that we need to have, and because Southbridge is so important to the future and to the current transportation infrastructure for the city, and it's been on the top of the list for a long time, and we're getting closer to seeing that project come to fruition and get to a point where we can actually look at trying to fund it. And you know, there are big questions with how the planning on the airport will affect funding and construction of Southbridge. So I think that's an important conversation that we need to have. But I also have seen the importance of some of our operations out there over the last year, and you know, we can't discount that. So thanks for being here and for the work you guys are doing. But I think there is more conversation, and how we move that forward, I'm not exactly sure.
Other questions, comments?
If I may, Mayor, and I'm on the airport board. I'm a non-pilot who lives at the north end of the runway and have for about 35 years. And, you know, I've seen the benefits of this. I think all of us probably have had, knowledge of somebody who has been medevaced because of the availability of classic air medical. We had a 3.5-year-old granddaughter of a good friend of ours who was just recently medevaced at 3:30 in the morning over to Children's Hospital with burst appendix. And the ability to have that here is an enormous benefit to this valley. They are up to about, one operation a day, at least classic air medical on the average. If you look in the skies, you can see them. They would love to be able to relocate their facility, to South End, build a hangar for the 2 helicopters that they have operating out of here now. And the neighborhood would like to have helicopter operations and the fueling put down at the South End. But we need to have a commitment made, a decision made that this is going to be what we want. And I have lived here a long time, and I think it is something that the community, supports, and we need to have this and support this facility out there. Thank you.
Thanks, Dave. There are some specific asks this evening, and I believe we've talked for well over a year about the Connex containers. I think the asphalt in front of the current classic air medical facility is something that's come up recently, and then the Armstrong study. And I don't know that there's any other. And obviously, as a work session, we're not making decisions right now, so something would go into a future agenda. But I guess I'll just give my 2 cents on some of those things. I think we have been trying, and Dave Merritt has pointed out before that we haven't always been successful ourselves in the city about not having Connex containers. We have gotten a lot better about that. And we have been doing much better with code enforcement for businesses. I believe that like Discount Tire had like 5 or 6 of those. And I think that they're, because of actions the city has taken and contact we've had, that they're building another facility to house all those tires and getting those out of there. So I think we don't want a junky town with a bunch of junky Connex containers all around. And so I think, at least my opinion is that while it might be helpful on a temporary basis, I think it goes against our own code. And so I'm not supportive of a Connex container field. And I get how that sucks, because until we really progress this conversation further down, we don't know if we are going to build or allow facilities to be built. So it's kind of a catch-22. I don't think there's any problem throwing down some asphalt. I don't think that commits anybody. It's not our money. It's classic air medical. So I'm fine with that. And then I think the Armstrong study, I guess I agree with Charlie. I'm personally not comfortable spending $10,000 right now when, it seems like we have all these studies. We have CDOT, we have Gruen and Gruen, we have another one being proposed. I think at some point, and I don't know when that point is. It's not going to be before Christmas, but at some point, we as a council needs to sit down and lay out kind of what a timeline looks like of when we are going to make decisions. Because I think that's one of the hard things. We just got done, you guys went around, we just got done with a very difficult work session on water rates. And former councilor Merritt probably had sat through a number of those hard conversations about water and electric and sewer rates, and probably were in council when that really hard decision to spend $35 million to move that sewer plant was made, and the rate increases that accompanied that. And that was a really difficult conversation. And one of the ways we got there is because we haven't raised the rates in 6 years. And by not raising the rates, we kept kicking the can down the road until we have what we have now. And I don't want that to happen here. I think we need to have a conversation probably after the first of the year and lay out a timeline where we can make a decision. And it doesn't have to be, the next meeting, we're going to sit here and decide this. I think this is I hate kicking the proverbial can down the road, but I think this is a 6 to 12 month conversation, because we need to have it thoughtful enough that the community feels that we took time and engaged and got people brought along. We did that with vacation rentals. And I think by and large, the committee felt that some people disagreed with it, but I think they felt at least that we got it right. We did a robust community process. And I think that that's what the community deserves on this decision as well. So I guess that would be my thought, is that we kind of lay out a timeline. We get together and just see what that timeline looks sometime after the first of the year, and start to move this conversation forward, because this uncertainty doesn't serve anybody well. Greg, Rippey.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I appreciate your comments. The paving question is very time sensitive, as snow will be here in the next, hopefully. And that is something that would probably want to get done this year. And, we thought maybe it could be handled at staff level, but then I understand that council wanted to take a look at it a little closer. So I would say, out of everything you discussed, that is the one item that is very time sensitive.
And is
Deborah, do we need?
Sorry, Charlie.
Right?
Sorry, I just want to clarify real quick. Greg, is that the asphalt in front of the Classic Air Medical facility that we're talking about? Okay, sorry. Go ahead, Charlie.
Is that something we have to approve, Deborah? Or are you okay with making that decision?
But the airport board and this decision is highly politicized. So I would prefer for city council to make the decision, or at least make the decision that you want me to make the decision.
All right, I need a few comments on that.
What is the cost? And is the cost, can you confirm the cost is covered by Classic Air?
Classic Air is paying for it, and the cost would be somewhere around $10,000.
To me, this is a no-brainer. They do this. I mean, I think it's a valuable service, and if this is going to help their ability to get their helicopters in without raising a bunch of dust, it's a no-brainer. I know we can't make a decision tonight, but I would certainly favor allowing them to go forward.
Well, and Charlie, we can't make a decision, but we can authorize Deborah to make a decision on our behalf, so we don't have to wait to put it onto a future agenda.
I agree. Yeah, I think that's within the discretionary decision-making for Deborah for spending. It's also, it's not an impact to the city budget. Classic Air is covering it, and it's a low enough amount that it's not like a huge infrastructure investment that, if decisions, if things move or decisions change going forward, it's not like we have a huge sunk cost there.
Well, and it's not our sunk cost, number one. And number two, Classic Air Medical is well aware. They would appreciate it to be a sunk cost, because they would love to be able to build a new hangar on the south end of the runway anyway. So I think they're hoping, Greg, jump in, but I think that in their ideal world, they've spent 10 grand on this, and 6 months later, they have to write that off because they're getting a new hangar somewhere.
You're absolutely right. And there's a weird dog leg that goes right through there anyway. That probably should have been configured differently to begin with from day one. And so I think it's a great way to improve the airport with OPM, other people's money.
Steve Davis.
I would support Deborah making that decision, as long as she makes the decision to allow them to go ahead and pave that.
I guess I have one other question. Does staff have any concerns about paving that area? Specifically, Terry, I'm directing to you, I think.
Yeah, we evaluated it from a stormwater and a grading perspective, Shelley. Our stormwater engineer happened to be out on site one day, and we talked to him about the additional asphalt and its effect on our stormwater permit out there. And from a staff standpoint, there are no concerns. It's fine.
Okay, thanks.
Mm-hmm.
So it seems like we have some pretty good consensus to allow Deborah to make the right decision. One thing I would say is, I don't know who made the call to not accept money from the government for the rental of those planes in those areas, but we're just not in position to be turning down money, regardless of the source or regardless of who's giving it to us. I mean, we all pay federal taxes. I just sent my taxes in today, actually, right before this meeting. And so I don't mind that money coming back. And I think in the future, if we are ever presented with that opportunity, and this is probably a standard cost and a standard just cost of doing business, and the federal government wants to give us money, please don't turn that down. We're just, as a city, not in our position to be turning down money from people. So I guess
let me clarify, please. Then,
sure.
It was not in the language of the use agreement, because the agreement specifically spoke about when the airport was closed. So the one contracting officer says, "Oh, I thought it was for whenever we still had a helicopter there." And so in the fairness, and Councilman Willman will appreciate this, the letter of the agreement said that what it was going to be. The one CO just, I think, misread it and was pleasantly surprised. But we thought it was a moral objective to not take advantage and still be in compliance with the use agreement that was in place.
Go ahead, Deborah.
Just say, City Council, in the future, I believe my office will be managing those contracts and making those decisions. It was not something that should have been run through the airport division. So I apologize for that.
No, that's fine. I think, we have a legal contract with Carpenter Handlin, and Carl's not on to speak to it, but Richard could be, and you don't need to, Richard. But I think if there is a question about that, we run it through legal. That's what they're there for. So, and Greg, I appreciate it. Obviously those folks were here putting out a fire, and those are heroes saving our community. We don't want to put the screws to anybody either. So that was just my 2 cents. Any other questions, comments from the board, or what are we, council? Amy, go ahead.
You'll need to unmute her.
I think she can unmute herself.
Yep.
Oh, there she is. Okay.
Hello. Hi, council. Hello, everybody. Just quickly want to say thank you for letting me serve as your airport manager. I am now in New Zealand, but I still care about this asset that the city has, and just want you to know I'm available for questions in the future. I do want to go back to the Armstrong consultant. The reason I felt so strongly about hiring Armstrong consultant when I was in that position of airport manager is because they offer a vast array and knowledge base of all airports and systems, and updating the CIP process. And they are available. They were available to me in that position for multiple questions that arose. And as you guys know, the airport manager is a part-time only position. There is the part-time manager, but I feel that it's very crucial to hire those guys, because whoever takes over this manager position is going to need some sort of resource and somebody to help reach out to, not necessarily for projects that need a scope of work involved, but just for a daily phone call of like, hey, this issue arose at the airport. Do you know who I could call? And for those type of services, those phone calls, they do not charge. It's that $10,000 in the budget is only if in the future you guys decide to keep the airport, then we could spend it on some sort of scope of work. But in the interim, they want to be available to help whoever the new manager is. You know, so I just want to make that point clear. And thank you.
Thanks, Amy.
Thanks, Amy. You are looking very New Zealand-esque. I don't know what it is, but congratulations. And Amy, thank you very much for your service, like you're in the military. But thanks for helping get us to this point. And we hope that things are going great in New Zealand.
Thanks. Yeah.
Yeah.
Good so far.
Awesome. All right. If there are no other questions, comments on behalf of anybody, we will actually wrap this up 3 minutes early. All right. Thank you, everybody. We really appreciate it. We will come back here at 6:10 and sit here awkwardly looking at each other until 6:15. All right. Take it later. Thanks, guys.